All right, hello YouTube. Welcome to episode 8, the eighth book club of Wizard and Glass. My name is Tad, of course. Sorry, a couple minutes late. Just getting everything going here. But here for book round roundtable, no, book club number 8 for Wizard and Glass. Let me go ahead and hit the intro and dive right in.
The Dark Tower by Stephen King. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. Go then. There are other worlds than these. Death, but not for you, gunslinger. It's time we had our own palaver, I think, and it's going to take a while.
And yet, dauntless, the slug horn to my lips I set, and blew. Child Roland to the Dark Tower came.
We are content, one from many. Let the palaver begin.
All right, hello and welcome to Dark Tower Palaver. This is our podcast covering Stephen King's magnum opus, the Dark Tower series. My name is Tad, and we are here for Wizard and Glass Part 8, Book Club Part 8. This will actually be the final book club of 2023. Just remember, I'll talk about the calendars in a second, but also remember this is the second to last. This is the penultimate episode of 2023. We ended up with 3 recording days in this month, so even though this is the second episode, this is not the last one of the year, which is why it's a book club. Let's go ahead and hit the intro stuff real quick. First of all, no spoiler warning. We do keep the book club episodes spoiler free. We do have a spoiler section at the very end, but I will keep it at the very end, and it'll be behind a sound effect and a screen thing that'll warn you that we're going into that section, so you won't be able to stumble in there accidentally. Then next, if you want to find the podcast, you can find it on any number of places, including Apple Podcasts. You can stream us on Spotify. You can find us on basically any podcasting service out there, including now Amazon Music and Audible, who are now in the podcast game. And then if you want to subscribe, rate, and review us on any of those services, that is always helpful. Helpful to all the algorithms and good ways for new listeners, new Dark Tower fans that maybe are new to podcasting to find us and join our extended quartet as well. Then if you want to join live, you can do that over here at youtube.com/darktowerpalaver. I always have it try to plot it out in advance what episodes we have coming up. I will say I have not got into 2024 yet, which I'll talk about the calendar in just one more second. Then if you want to, on the YouTube side, if you want to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. If there are any changes to the episodes in terms of times or dates or whatever, knock on wood, I think I've gotten really lucky this year. If I remember correctly, I don't think I've gotten sick once this year. So that's awesome. But if it does happen, especially this time of year when it's getting colder, so if I were to get sick, for instance, and had to delay a week, your notifications would alert you of that. And then if you want to find the show notes, you can do that at darktowerpalaver.com. There are no real show notes for the book club episodes, but there is the hub of the entire Dark Tower Palaver universe. If you want to find any links to anything Dark Tower Palaver wise, you can do it over there, as well as like the questions for new listeners, all that kind of fun stuff. It's definitely where you can go to find links for everything. And if you want to support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/darktowerpalaver. With that, you get access to the Discord server. I know I've been a little slacking on the Hangouts, but I do want to make that up to everyone. I think I might plan something maybe even next week as kind of a last hurrah of 2023 and then move us into 2024. I'll definitely get that a little bit more squared away. And then if you want to contact the show, you can do that in a number of ways. First of all, if you want to email the show, do it at show@darktowerpalaver.com. Again, that is show@darktowerpalaver.com. darktowerpalaver.com. I have a challenge out right now because in the next episode, I want to pick the topic for the March Insanity 2024. So that, I like to pick the topic at the end of the previous year, so that we basically have January and February to kind of fill in all of the contenders that we want to vote on. So if you have any ideas for that, send that in at show@darktowerpalaver.com. Then if you want to find us on Facebook, facebook.com/darktowerpalaver, on Twitter at darktowerpod, that's at darktowerpod, and then Instagram is darktowerpalaver, all one word. And that is all of the intro stuff. And then again, so I already mentioned there is one more episode this year. It'll be in 2 weeks from now, because we landed in a way to where December has 3 recording weeks. Sometimes we usually have 2 months every year that have that, with the way calendars work, and this year it just so happened to be December. So we do have a 3rd episode in December. That will be the year-end bash. I will say the thing I'm not sure about is the call-in aspect, just because the tablet that I had been using for that pretty much since the beginning of the show has finally crapped out, and I have not got a new tablet yet. So I'll still look around and see if there's something I can figure out for the call-in. If not, though, it'll just be a fun year-end bash, cover some whatever we have roundtable-wise. Definitely be awesome to have everyone in the chat, and just kind of throw the year out with a bang, and hopefully go into a new positive year of 2024, hopefully with some Flanagan news. I'm mostly giving up hope that we'll have a whole lot of news on that this year, just because Hollywood tends to take almost the entire month of December off for the holidays. So I don't know. It doesn't mean that something won't happen, but I'm just not as hopeful. But January, maybe we can get some news. That's my positive hope there. So yeah, on the 30th, we will be here for Roundtable 145. I have not yet jumped ahead to do the calendar for next year. I just got to work out, because there's 1 week we can pick that misses most of the major holidays and all that fun stuff. I just need to figure out the way that works out. I did not. Usually, I do some show prep in the off weeks between shows. But last week, I actually went to Arizona with Hayden. We went down to see a comedian for my first time in Arizona, actually down in the Phoenix area. So I spent the whole weekend down there. So there was no show prep that I was able to do from afar. So I'm a little bit more underprepared than I would like to be for this episode. And for instance, like doing the calendar. That's the other thing I wanted to mention is the doing the YouTube events out in advance. I do know the year-end bash currently is the last one scheduled, and that is simply because I haven't worked out the calendar for 2024 yet. Once I do that, I'll go and throw all the January 24 episodes into YouTube, so those show. I usually always try to keep at least a month's worth of episodes showing on the upcoming, just so there's no confusion. I guess we're always kind of hopefully always shooting for the same bat time, same bat channel, but I like to have those there for sure. But I know I've dropped the ball a few times throughout this year, but I know this one was mainly just because I have yet to work out the 2024 calendar. Hello, Brocky. Welcome to the live stream and the chat here. Thank you for joining. So yeah, that is what we got coming up. Roundtable 145. And then, I mentioned the calendar. We'll get that. And I will have that by the next episode. So going into episode 145, we'll have the January episodes as well as kind of, how it'll fall out for 2024 with where the episodes land. And then also I wanted to, I know this isn't part of the book club generally speaking, but I wanted to mention the March Insanity. I'm sorry that we want to have the topics in for the next episode. So if you do have any topic ideas, if you could email those or even tweet whatever, Facebook, any of the social media stuff, send those in, or even a comment here in the YouTube if you want to. If you're watching it in the future, even I will try to look through all that stuff. Just trying to get a cool idea. I've already had a few people reach out with some awesome ideas. So I want to figure that out, and I will announce it on the next episode, and then we could spend January and February working out our nominations. And then let's see, I think that is everything announcements wise. yeah, I think that's it. So let's go ahead and jump on over. Let me go ahead and look at the outline stuff first. So remember, this book has two short parts one at the beginning, one at the end, and then the two in the middle are a little bit longer. So we are currently past part one. We're into part two, which is Susan. I think now we are about I don't know, maybe a third of the way into this part right now. So yeah, we're in part two, titled Susan. Let's see, of book 4, which is of course Wizard and Glass. And then we are currently where we left off. We are starting with chapter 3, which is titled has a subtitle of A Meeting on the Road. Also bear with me in terms of length. I remember last episode was the first solo episode, and because of that, the prep had already been done, and it ended up falling really short just because it was just me. Hopefully this one will get a little bit closer to what we try to aim for lengthwise. I did up the percentages, I think about double, but I will figure out as we go. I guess if I did enough, I might have to retool the percentages even more, but for now I doubled what I did last time, so hopefully that'll get us close to where we want to be runtime wise. Let's see, and then David's in the chat throwing out some ideas. There's that's some good, that's good. I'll have to come back to the chat when I'm not live so I can write those down. But yes, thank you. Throw them out anywhere, because there's some really cool ideas. And it's funny because I haven't reached out to Peter yet, because there was one time we had this conversation. I think it was shortly after the 2023 one, and I think just in the chat and stuff. And I don't remember if he took notes on that and took down all the notes of all. And this is probably in either March or April of this year. And we had a lot of really cool ideas, and I think he may have kept notes on it, but I don't know if he did or not. If he did, if I can get my hands on those, we can use that as well. But I will pick a fun topic for sure, announce it next episode, and we will go into the year to fill out what we'll be voting on. And I'm also going to do some research and find a better voting platform. I don't think I have yet to find a voting place I'm super happy with. Everything I've done so far has not, I don't know, they haven't all been terrible, but none of them have been perfect. So I'm still looking to find the perfect place for everyone to vote and vote easily. Yeah, I will figure that out as well. But we have some time on that. So again, chapter 3, Meeting on the Road. And so this one, let's go ahead and dive right in. So starting off here, subchapter 1. Recapping wise here, Susan did not hear the rider approaching because this had been the strangest night of her life. She was heading back towards town and was now troubled by a greater understanding of the agreement that she had entered into. Sure, she had a reprieve of some months, but at the end of that time, she would lose her virginity to Mayor Thorin, a skinny, twitchy man with fluffy white hair surrounding his bald spot, a man whose wife's sad looks toward him were too painful to look at, a knuckle-cracking backslapper who always seemed concerned about offending his chancellor, Reimer. He's Thorin, of course. I didn't put that in my notes, so I'm just going off of memory here. That's always a dangerous thing. Susan had long observed this man. Her father was in charge of the barony's horses and had often gone to Seafront for business, and she had tagged along many times and had seen a lot of Hartthorn over the years. And then it does also mention that he was over 50 years older, or no, he was nearly 50 years older than Susan. So, adding to the gross factor of everything that we had a number of episodes back when we were dealing with Rhea, both Rhea on her own and then Rhea with Susan, both of those being pretty disgusting. But we obviously know the circumstance that Susan is in, but now to find out for sure that he is almost 50 years older than she is, that's pretty nasty. That's pretty gross. King is getting us a lot of pretty nasty and gross things in this story so far. And we're not even that far in. Let's see, where are we at here? I mean, if the Kindle thing is to to be believed. Let's see where we're at right now is 20%, and by the end we're going to be around 25%. So we're maybe a quarter of the way in, but it feels so new into this story, and it just feels like there's been a lot of gross things so far. And I know we're barely scratching the surface of the actual story and tale, because the first chunk of this was obviously in the present tense with beating Blaine and all that fun stuff. But in this flashback, how little of it we've had so far, there's been a lot of nasty stuff. Okay, so my notes here. I love that King mentioned the writer coming up on her in the first sentence, and then he dives deep into the mind of Susan, so much so that by the time he follows up with the writer, we as readers might even be surprised by him as she is, as surprised by him as she is. It's just kind of one of those classic King tease things. I mean, we've talked about it all the time, where it just seems like King doesn't really care about spoilers. There's times he'll even spoil stuff himself. He'll say things like, "Oh, and this is the last time, Joe and Larry ever saw each other," or just some weird. I just grab random names, although I'm just thinking about it, and that actually might make sense in one story, not this one. But he'll throw stuff like that out all the time. I just think that he's definitely, that's just his style. And this kind of feels like a different version of that. But to mention the writer at the very first couple sentences, and then basically deep dive into Susan's mind, it kind of can get you to the point where if you're just carried away in the story, it can kind of get, you can kind of forget about it, forget about the writer, and get caught up in her emotions and, thought process. So that's kind of a cool little sleight of hand by King as an author here. Also, the dive into her mind is great for setting the scene. I know that we've learned a lot from Rhea, but this feels a lot less subjective and terrible, because these are not words of a witch. These are the understandings of not a witch of Susan. So it just feels a little bit less cruel and nasty as what we got from Rhea, even if Rhea is not necessarily lying, but she's certainly going to put the most negative twist on everything that she is talking about. And then my last note for this section, so not only is Thorin nearly 50 years older than Susan, which is gross, but he seems to be a rather boorish and gross human being in general as well. He's not like a suave, and I'm not saying that would make it better, but there's almost nothing for her to cling on to here. It's not like he's like an older, suave, James Bondish type dude that can maybe help the medicine go down better. No, he's just I don't know, just kind of an oaf, a nasty, disgusting old oaf. So that's unfortunate. So then going on here into subchapter 1, she then thinks that she made the bargain lightly enough, but then she thinks that that's a bit unfair of herself. It was not necessarily lightly, but that it does. Then she does think, though, that she's lost very little sleep over it. Aunt Cord's arguments had been little enough to have arguments had been little enough to have indentured off the to have the indenture off the lands, or lien, I guess is the word that we would use in our modern parlance. So basically, take the lien or the indenture off of their lands is kind of the onus that Aunt Cord had put on her to finally own their own piece of the drop. In fact, as well as tradition, actual papers saying that they owned it, and they also own some horses again. Only 3, but it was 3 more than they have now. All that for something as simple as sleeping with Thorin a time or two and to bear him a child, which millions of women had done to no harm. And he was no mutant, but a man with noisy knuckles, which is, again, just kind of gross. But she's trying to find the positives, I guess. And Aunt Cord had said that if time and Ka permitted, she might marry again after Thorin. But while the law would not call her a whore, she thinks in her own heart that she would actually be a whore. Susan realized that Aunt Cord had been cunning in harping on the child in convincing her of all this. As Susan was not long removed from putting her baby dolls away for good. So the idea of her own baby would be very appealing to her. So that is a kind of a nasty manipulation of her for sure. But Rhea had opened her eyes to the fact that Thorin wanted more than a child. She knew how animals mated, that they were put together until, quote, the seed took. Then they were separated again, but now she realized with him wanting more than a baby, this agreement was not going to be a neat and tidy thing such as 1 or 2 times sleeping with him like Aunt Cord had made her think. But it was too late. The bargain had been made, and she had been proven honest by the witch. She thought of the details of what it might look and sound like when the time came. Tears streaked her cheeks. She also thought about what she had seen in the witch's room, the pink glow and the hypnotized hag. So yeah, this is sad. Just to see the manipulation that she's under, the false pretenses, also that it's not even necessarily for her gain. I guess we haven't necessarily totally proofed that out yet, but there's just something about the aunt kind of arguing about getting the indenture off the land that feels very self-serving to the aunt, I guess, is my assumption. I remember reading it the first time. Just because, I don't know, it just seems like if there's money to be made and someone has some benefit, even, and I don't know, maybe Susan owns it, but I just don't feel like that would be the case, especially because Aunt Cord is arguing it so hard. So that kind of feels nasty and dirty, just manipulation there. And really the thing that we got to remember too is that she is just a child here. It says that she's not long from putting her dolls away. So yeah, we're talking about probably a teenager, maybe a later teenager, but a teenager, which is kind of makes it even grosser, especially just the whole thing, the whole manipulation is pretty nasty. But then on top of it, the everything we've been explained to about the mayor as well doesn't necessarily make him out to be, again, a catch. Not that that's would make it any better. But there's a lot of bad on bad on bad here. This is like stacking up here. This is like a force multiplier. Hello, Mark. As well as I guess I forgot to say hello, David. David, you threw out some ideas for the March Insanity is cool as well, which is awesome. Thank you for that. But I forgot to say hi. So hello, everyone in the chat. Baraki, David, Mark. So my next note here. Also, I'm not liking this aunt. We've heard reference to her before a couple times now, but to see her basically playing such an active role in convincing Susan of accepting this is not necessarily something that's going to endear her to me. I know this is very early on, but I don't know. I just so far, nothing we've seen gives us an idea that this is necessarily a great person. So we'll definitely have to watch that. I remember the first time reading it just kind of being thrown off by this section in particular, where it just felt like, okay, so if there's the scales being weighed of whether she's going to accept this deal or not, Aunt Cord, rather than maybe trying to defend her from the deal and protect her from it, she was arguing for her to go towards it, which is kind of the opposite of what you should expect from a parental figure. So the fact that she's not acting parental, the fact that maybe we'll hopefully find out more, but maybe that she might be actually benefiting maybe even more than Susan from Susan doing this. There's a lot to not like here, and I know it's not all spelled out here, but that's what I'm viewing as a first time reader. I remember viewing that where I'm like, all right, there's already a couple strikes against this lady here. There was something earlier too. I think in the Rhea conversation, her aunt came up, and there was something that was said that kind of made me, raise an eyebrow and just wonder. But of course, we've not met Aunt Cord yet, so we'll have to see on that. My next note: sad to hear her view of herself as a whore. The judgment should actually be aimed more at the mayor and his cronies for making this offer, and to her aunt for not rejecting it out of hand. Instead, this poor girl is turning the moral judgment against herself, which is probably the one that deserves it least. It's just sad. Just again, the manipulation, there's manipulation all across the board here. And to manipulate it so much so that, she's in this bargain, but then on top of it, that she's going to then point any moral judgments only at herself and not to the others around her. This is all adding up to be pretty, heartbreaking, stuff. And then my last note before we move on here, I think that her mind is still sticking on the witch I like that her mind is still sticking on the witch and the ball. I think this is clever writing because it shows us, the reader, or at least to me, I remember when I was reading this, it kind of told me, it's like King reaching outside of the page and be like, put his finger on it, go, hey, don't forget this. This might be important. I think it might be easy to take for granted a magic object in the hands of a witch, but to bring it up again here and have her kind of thinking about it and pondering it kind of makes me wonder if it's King, making us, telling us as readers. I always kind of feel that whenever you have repetition in general, there's usually a reason for that in terms of, especially in the hands of a skilled storyteller. I'm not going to say it doesn't, it does happen in novels, but I would say it's a little bit less in novels, whereas when it comes to movies or television where the minutes that they have are so limited that if you have people repeating something, if it's in the hands of a skilled storyteller, the repetition is for a reason. And I know with novels, there's a little bit more breadth and a little bit more space and leeway. So repetition doesn't necessarily always mean important things, but anytime there's like repetition, I mean, we've already talked about it early in this book where King repeated some stuff from the previous book, because we got to remember this was 7 years removed from the last book. So there may be people that are reading this for the first time or haven't read the last book in 7 years. So there's good times for repetition in something like this to catch people up. But when he's repeating things not that far down the page from where we read it the first time, it kind of makes me question a little bit. Like, okay, why are we getting repetition here? Let's pay attention to this perhaps. Going on here with the some more recap here. Susan's first alarmed thought as she finally realized the hoofbeats were approaching her was that she needed to hide in the corpse of trees that she was currently in front of. She thought the chances of anyone out this time of night being above board was very small. Were small chances. But she had no time to get into the trees. She considered the ditch and sprawling out flat. It would at least give give a chance for the person they might just ride by. But before she could make a move in that direction at all, the rider hailed her, bidding her good evening and that her days are long on the earth. And she thought that it might be one of the new men who were always lounging around Mayor's house or the Traveler's Rest. Not the old one with the wavery voice, but maybe the one they called DePape. She returned the greeting. She did not believe it was DePape or Reynolds. All she could really tell was he wore a flat-brimmed hat, and she would always associate with the inner baronies, people who were more common before people that she would see in this area more commonly before John Farson came, and the bloodletting began. That's an interesting turn of phrase. As he came up beside her, she forgave herself for not hearing him because she forgave herself in her own mind. She wasn't like asking forgiveness, but she forgave herself in her own mind for not hearing him coming because she started to look at his pack and realized there was no buckles or bells, and she could see that everything that on his pack, on his horse, was tied down tight. So there wasn't a lot of general noise coming from his tack and saddle. It was almost the rig of a harrier, which she always thought of, which always made her think of Jonas of the wavery voice and his two friends, because she figured that certainly at some point, maybe not that long ago, those three had probably been harriers. And then she looks back, who she's looking at here with the writer, and thinks maybe gunslinger. But then again, she saw no guns. He had a bow on his saddle, but she figured she'd also figured there had never been a gunslinger as young as him. And it mentions that he was probably somewhere near her age, one way or the other. So again, we kind of got an idea that she's definitely not an adult. She's probably a teenager. So she's assuming this person's about the same age, more or less. So my notes here. My first one, I'm an introvert, so I feel very seen here with her immediate thought of hiding and not being seen when hearing someone approaching. Of course, I'm not necessarily wandering, the country paths and stuff, but I do know there's been times where if there's a way to skirt into another hallway or down an aisle at a store and avoid being seen by someone that maybe just don't want to talk to, not even for any reason other than you don't want to talk to someone at that point. That feels like me as an introvert. as well as I don't know, just in general. It feels very familiar, even if it's a different context than I would generally get. But as a introvert, I feel that. Although for her, it's obviously not an introvert thing; it's more of a fear thing. She's out at the kind of in the wilderness ish. I think she's kind of between the witch's hut and town, so I don't think this is necessarily neighborhood territory. And she's obviously a young girl; she's alone. For her, it's more of a danger thing. But for me, as an introvert, I definitely feel the oh shit, please don't see me vibe that she's putting off here. Next up, also it gives a small glimpse of the world that she assumes anyone out this late is up to no good. It just kind of reflects the world a little bit. I mean, I think that in my mind, I look at it from our world. The difference between like a big urban city versus like kind of a small country town. I don't know. I feel like if you're in a certain area, I guess you'll be judged if you're in a smaller town. If like you're out late, like they may assume you're up to no good. So that kind of gives you an idea that she's probably in a smaller community. Although who knows, maybe even in the bigger communities in this world, you could be out any time of the night and not be suspected of things. But I know even it's funny for me because even here in Salt Lake, in my lifetime, I think it's changed to the point where Salt Lake was small enough when I was younger that I think you kind of got the vibe of like what are you doing out this late? Like you shouldn't be out. Like the only people that are out are up to no good. Versus now, I feel like there's a little bit, not that there's much of a nightlife in Salt Lake, obviously, but I feel like if you're out driving at 1 or 2 in the morning, a little bit after closing time for bars, I just don't think you're given the same suspicion right off the bat. I think there's still suspicion, but it isn't as immediate as it used to be when I was younger. And in my rapscallion days, there were times I was out and about way later than I should have been when I was a child. Out on what we would have called adventures with me and my brother, and my cousin. But as a adult, I look back and cringe that we were probably in danger because there weren't necessarily great. And I know it's Salt Lake, so I'm not pretending like it's crazy dangerous, but for a bunch of 12-year-old kids, maybe not the safest. So this part of the world, which is pleasant people, so nobody is out late at night. And I think that I guess the other thing I'd point to here, in my mind, maybe, is that it's by choice, not necessarily even out of fear. I don't think that like in a smaller part of the world like this, people are necessarily afraid to be out at night. But I think that they're just by choice. They're going to be home asleep, and if you're not, then there's just maybe suspicion thrown at you. So we have met the three men, Jonas, DePape, and Reynolds, through the flashback with Rhea. We didn't see much, but we saw a little bit with her flashback. But now we're learning more about them. They are new men, which is the key given here, and they are often lurking around Mayer's house. Also, she believes that's one of the two places she mentioned. But Mayer's house, that's interesting because they're new in town. They're hanging around the mayor. I don't know. It's just an interesting thing. And also we know she doesn't know. We know that they are the ones that delivered the ball to Rhea, so they're also dealing with magical objects and witches. So yeah, there's not a lot good going with these three people so far from everything we've seen. Also, she believes they were Harriers at some point before. I mentioned that before. So they are rough, but trying not to be anymore, or at least trying to appear as though they're not that way anymore, is her read of them. So that's something we'll have to remember. Is she kind of, and I get that from Susan too. I think there are just people you can look at. I know you don't want to prejudge people, but there are certain people you look at and you can just tell. Doesn't necessarily mean they're hard cases now, but there's certain people you can look at and go, that person has lived a hard life, or that person used to be a hard case. Even if they're kind and polite now, there's just a certain look that some people have. That you kind of get from the rough and tumble of certain aspects of life. So the writer clicked side mouth like she did, and like her dad had done and had taught her at the horse, and it stopped immediately. He dismounted with an unconscious grace, and she tried to tell him not to trouble himself, but to keep going. If he had heard the alarm in her voice, he did not acknowledge it. After he landed in front of her, she realized he was young, around her age. So she already thought she was young. Now she's for sure saying around her age. His clothes were that of a working cowboy, but she noticed that they were new. which is always an interesting thing. When someone tries to look like I think of this, like they're saying cowboy, but I think in my mind it's like a farmer, right? Someone wearing farmer clothes, but all of them are brand new, basically almost still have the tags on them. And I know that's not tags in this world, but I think it just gives you an idea. We've seen it in movies and television and stuff where, someone is trying to pretend that they're someone that they're not. And usually a dead giveaway is something like that. If you're trying to portray yourself as a blue collar, hardworking, salt of the earth type person, but all the blue collar, salt of the earth clothes you're wearing still have creases in them, that's probably an indicator of things. So, that's interesting. He introduced himself as Will Dearborn and doffed his hat and bowed like they did in the Inner Baronies. It struck her as absurd to see such courtliness out here in the middle of nowhere. She smelled the acrid smell of the oil patch on the edge of town. She laughed and worried it would offend him, but it did not. She introduced herself and curtsied. He apologized for startling her and says yes at one point instead of I, and she thinks that he is indeed from the Inner Baronies. So the difference of using yes versus I is enough to give her even more clues that he is not from around here. She again tried to tell him to ride on. He tells her it is late and she is alone, so they should go the rest of the way together. That's what he says. She tries to cry him off, but he insists. He calls her Sigh, and she finds it irritating as she is not a school teacher or an old aunt. She mentions her late father and expects an apology for her loss, but he just offers her to ride his horse and doesn't give an apology. She says she cannot ride a horse of a stranger. Her reputation would not be as easy to fix if spoiled as something like a piece of clothing that you can just wash. He says there's no one out here to see them. She tells him not to call her Sigh because it makes her feel like an old woman. Every objection she has, he has an answer to, and she sees him better finally, and she sees that he is handsome. Let's see. Sorry, I gotta change pages here. He then says if she won't ride, he will walk with her to the edge of town, and Rusher will be their chaperone. She asks him not to do it, but he insists because these are not good times. She agrees, but under the condition that it is only to the first mailbox that she'll go with him. Beyond there, they have to part companies. So my notes here, even with the name Will Dearborn given here, I never looked at this as anyone other than Roland. I think it was only on rereads where I thought that maybe King was trying to be coy here. It is always easier in books to kind of obfuscate people's identities because all you're given is the name, and if you're given a description at all. But here, I don't know. I just assumed. I think I've mentioned before on the show over the years where it's like anytime someone bad shows up, I always just assume they're Randall Flagg, and I assume that they're him until they're proven not to be. And I don't think it's that necessarily extreme here, but I did kind of assume this is just Roland. I mean, it kind of makes sense with the way the narrative is flowing. But it was funny on future rereads where I was like, oh God, yeah, King's not really saying much about that, is he? Like maybe he actually was trying to keep this a little bit mysterious, but didn't work on me if that was his intent. So world building that we see, there are distinct styles of both dress and speech that differentiate people from different areas. I think that speech is something that we can kind of find in our own culture. Where in terms of like in a small setting, right? Like if we're just talking different baronies of one land, that would be like states or cities in a country. I would say that manner of speak could be something that could tell someone is from California or New York or the South or whatever. But I think dress is something that's a little bit unique because I don't know. Do we have a lot of different styles of dress? I feel like of course there's a lot of different styles, but are any of them very unique to a region? I feel like people wearing like t-shirts and jeans is pretty universal, or people that are wearing like suits and sports coats and all that. Like there's definitely things that could tell you like about a person, but I don't know that we have like, whereas like someone's vocal tics or accents can kind of give you an idea where they're from. I don't know that we necessarily have it where you can look at someone and go look at their dress and just go, yep, that person's from Boston, or oh, that person's from Montana. I mean, I'm sure there's some very general things, but I think even like Montana or like a more rural area, you might see a certain country-ish vibe to the dress, but I think that doesn't narrow it down because you've got, all kinds of places in the South. You got Texas, you got the Southwest with Arizona, New Mexico, as well as places like Montana. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing when you kind of compare and contrast our world versus theirs. Speech makes sense to me, but dress is definitely a unique thing. Although in our world, if you looked beyond like a smaller setting and looked at the entire planet, yes, you could definitely see dress things that can give people away, like with what region, area, country, whatever that they're from. People certainly dress differently. There's a lot of diversity in how people present themselves. My next note, an oil patch gets a passing mention here. Definitely feels anachronistic for me. For everything else we're seeing here. Of course, we've seen plenty of things like this throughout the series. We've seen, gas pumps. We've seen Hey Jude. We've seen there's all these things that seem like, we've seen, crazy AI monorails. We've seen all kinds of crazy stuff, but we haven't necessarily, I don't know. It never ceases to kind of throw me off because it feels like we're kind of in like an old Westy area, right? You got 6-shooters, you got ponchos, you're riding horses, they're not riding cars. They're not riding motorcycles. So just to then talk about oil patches, it feels anachronistic and it just throws me off a little bit. I know it makes sense with this world, but it never ceases to kind of stop me in my track a little bit and be like, wait, oil patch, refineries, what the fuck? This doesn't make sense for this world. Or just initial knee-jerk reaction. But then, of course, I have my mind catches up and go, like, no, it does make sense for this world because this world is all kinds of crazy and it's like post-apocalyptic almost. Then it makes sense. But my first knee-jerk reaction is always kind of like, no, that's wrong. That shouldn't be here. This is an Old West story. This is Clint Eastwood. This isn't places for oil derricks. So my next note here, King does such a good job of writing with the electricity in this scene. It's hard to put words to it, but even the first time reading it, I think you could feel there are sparks with these two characters. And I don't even necessarily think that King's doing it in a lazy fashion. Like I think sometimes, like a lazy author can say things like, just literally say that, like, oh, there's an electricity between these two or whatever. It's like, in movies, they say show, don't tell. And I think that like lesser authors would just tell like, oh, there's electricity between these two, but they're not really showing it. King's not even really saying it. He's just showing it. I just feel it. There's an electricity between these two that's just hard to ignore, even though King's not overtly stating that like there's a tension here. So I think that just really goes to his quality as an author to be able to portray that without overtly calling it out. It's like the ultimate show don't tell if you're talking movie nomenclature seen in a book here. Let's see, and then Mark's read my mind. I know that message came in right before I said that, but Mark says, King does such a great job of writing how it feels to be 16 and immediately smitten with someone. I was transported back to the first time I met a girl and wasn't afraid to flirt with her. So yeah, Mark, we're both on the exact same like you sent that at the perfect time because I was reading my note about something saying the very similar thing, and I just have to give King praise because again, it's not done in a clunky manner. It's not just saying, oh, these two, like he's not. It's all between the lines. But it is so just raw and there that you can't miss it. Like it's not something that like a dull reader can miss. Like it's there. It's unmistakable. It's unmistakable. So yeah, well done from Cy King with this here. And then my last note, it probably doesn't hurt that it doesn't seem like Susan has many people, if any, in her life that are good people. And Will seems like a good mouthwash for the nasty taste of the night that she has just had. So, maybe that's some element of her letting her guard down a little bit is seemingly she's surrounded by a lot of people that don't have her interests at heart and aren't, just have their own motivations and stuff and aren't necessarily good people for her. And then to find someone that just seems so, good and just wanting to, I don't know. It just seems right. Seems opposite of everything that we've seen of her so far. I know we're very, very short into meeting this character, but what we've seen so far has not given us a lot of good in her life. And it seems like Will Dearborn here is some positive that she could be seeing here. So subchapter 2, jumping in over here, she thought that he would be chattering away despite his promise to keep silent, because that is what most boys did around her. She was not vain, but she knew that she was good looking, if for no other reason than how boys acted around her. Also, this one had a bunch of questions that he could ask that most boys in this town could not, because they already knew her. Things like, how old was she? Had she always lived here? Were her parents alive? And a bunch more of questions like that were just as boring. And that's her thoughts. So that's interesting. But he did not ask her about schooling or family or friends. And with friends, she kind of thinks to herself, and friends is the perfect way for someone to ask if they're trying to find out about maybe romantic rivals, right? Like you ask about friends to a girl or a guy, depending on who you are and who you're attracted to. Asking about their friends and their surrounding people might be a way to find out, like, do they fancy someone or not? So she clocks that. I will say, I think I forgot to. I thought I noted it somewhere, and I thought it was in that last section, because so far there's been a couple things here that Susan has caught on to, that she is smart. She has got a sharpness and an intelligence. And I must have missed that. No, or maybe I'm going to mention it up here in the future somewhere, but I should have already mentioned it, because there's already a few different things now where she's caught on to some things, and she's very, very smart. And I got to give her a lot of credit, because again, she is just a kid. She's not like this hardened adult, but she's showing a sharpness and a wit, and I don't know, just a keen eye that could be missing, that I've seen a lot of adults don't have, let alone a child. So good on her for picking up on some of this stuff. He just and then it goes on, he just continued to walk silently, looking off towards the clean sea. Then they get in front of Sitgo as they're moving, and they pass in front of Sitgo, and she was glad to have him here with her suddenly, because she always found the oil patch spooky. Most of the towers had stopped working, but 19 of the 200 could not be stopped, even if there was no use in the oil that they pumped anymore. Rusher then touched her, and she let out a little shriek, and Will wheeled toward her, hands going to his empty belt, and then he smiled and said that Rusher felt ignored. She then tells him that she changed her mind and she would like to ride. So she was expecting some boring questions, and then is annoyed when none come. That kind of makes me laugh. Kind of what Mark was saying. That feels like a 16-year-old type thing, something of a child, where you kind of you don't necessarily want the 10th degree of boring questions, but then you're a little bit miffed when those questions don't come, even though you don't really want them. But the breaking of the game, whatever it might be, and I've even seen that with adults, like you just expect certain things, whether it be socially or whatever, and then when those things don't come, even if those things would have annoyed you, you're annoyed that they are not coming, I guess. I don't know. It's an interesting thing. It makes me laugh too, that she's her reaction there. So then we get an idea of this oil patch. Is at this point, we get an idea what the oil patch is. At this point is how I meant to read that. Not much left working, but those that do, it says can't be stopped, and that gives me the idea that maybe they've tried stopping them. Maybe. It's kind of an interesting thing. I don't know, unless it's like the more proverbial can't be stopped in terms of like, well, the rest have broken down, but these ones just won't stop. But the fact it says can't be stopped kind of gave me a vibe like maybe they've tried to shut this down, which again, if it's no use, I could see why. But it's an interesting turn of phrase here, and a little bit, it's kind of a cool thing for King too, because it's just a couple words there, but it opens up a whole bunch of questions that you could ask if you're nerds like us that love this and want to like dive in deep. It makes you wonder, at some point, were they trying to stop it? If so, why were they trying to stop it? Is it because everyone feels as creeped out and spooked out by it as she does here? Or is it, I don't know. There's just, because otherwise I don't see why you'd want to stop it. I mean, I get you're not pulling anything from it, but it's not really hurting you by running, I guess. So I don't know. Baraki says, as a young, attractive woman, Susan was used to having the advantage with boys her age, and she wants to play her game the way she expected. It's annoyed but intrigued also, and yeah, that's exactly it. I think that's exactly. I think she kind of just knows how it usually goes, and the fact that it isn't kind of miffs her a little bit. But then again, with her calling them boring questions, it's not like she's necessarily like, disappointed that they're not coming because they're boring. But yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy. And again, back to Mark's comment, it also just speaks to how good King is at writing these younger characters. We've seen it all throughout his pantheon of stuff. Things like Stand By Me, which is of course The Body, the short story. There's all kinds of kids that King has written. He's written them so well, and here we are seeing it again from a book in, what was it, 1997? I always blank. Yeah, it is 97. So 1997, this is close to 20 years removed from the height of King's golden age, the first golden age. But here we are. We see King as an older guy. He's not a 19, 20-year-old writer anymore. He's a little bit older, and he's still writing children absolutely wonderfully and just absolutely capturing just the exact right elements. And I think that all of us see some element of our previous selves in these kind of things with these characters. So it's really cool because I don't know. I think that there's a lot of people that just don't do it well. If I had a nickel for every time I went to a movie or even read some books where, there's a child character and it's just like, oh, well, that child character has the maturity and intelligence of a full-grown adult. And, of course, in your mind, you're like, well, it's because the writer is a full-grown intelligent adult, and they can't really transform their voice or their mind to fit a child, so then the child just becomes like this prodigy that just looks like and sounds like a 25-year-old college educated adult. So King being able to avoid that is awesome, because he just I don't know, it just feels so real and so raw when it comes to it, and I think we've all been there, so it feels very familiar to most of us. Mark, on that question, I have something in the spoiler section to talk about that. Let's see. So then going on my last note here, Will exposed himself a bit with the muscle memory, though we do not get any thoughts from Susan in that regards to that. There's no response that we see from her about him going to his belt, at least not yet. So that is this subchapter. So subchapter 3, moving on here. Will turned his back and looked towards Sitgo as Susan laid the poncho over the saddle. She then mounted the saddle, lifting her skirt and looking over at him, expecting him to be peeking. But he was not. He seemed fascinated by the oil derricks. She was a bit angry as to why he was so interested in them. They had been there 6 centuries or more and stinking the area up her whole life. She felt exhilarated and wondered if it were because of Will that she was feeling this way. And thought that that was not only nonsense, but it was dangerous nonsense. She covered her lower half with the poncho. Will began to whistle, and she was startled that he was whistling the song "Careless Love," the same song she had been singing along the way going to Rhea's hut earlier. We saw it in the story, so that's definitely interesting. Her father whispered in her head and said that maybe it was Caw, and that she thought back there was no such thing, and she would not go looking for it looking for it in every passing wind and shadow like some old woman. His voice returned, saying that maybe it was better if she were right, because if it were Caw, it would come like a wind, and her plans would have no prayer of standing against it. No, she thought, not Caw, just a chance encounter with a nice young man. She then speaks and tells Will she is decent and he can turn back around. He turns around and she saw his eyes. She saw in his eyes that he fancied her as well. She mentions having horses in her near future. She being potentially owning horses in her near future, and expects questions to then come. But again, they do not come. He asks what the oil patch is called, and she tells him Sitgo. She tells him some of the pumps still work, and they moved toward town, and that is it. This is a shorter subchapter. So my notes here, 6 centuries or more. Again, this is so bizarre because for us, the usage of oil in the way that we understand it today, of course, I know that there was like oils used in lamps and stuff going back thousands of years, but oil refined and used in larger machinery only dates back to the 1800s. So the idea of this oil derrick standing in this spot for over 600 years is a wild concept to me. Again, especially because we're not talking about like, if it were like a Star Trek, super futuristic sci-fi spaceships and aliens and stuff, it would be easier to be like, 600 years. Oh yeah, that makes sense. 1800s to 600 years in the future, whatever that might be. But for this, again, to kind of feel like an old Western time period and realm, it just throws me off. And again, 600 years just feels wrong because that's oil in the way that we're talking about here. We haven't understood it that long. So for them, seemingly being less advanced than we are, but having oil pumps that have been there for 600 years is just crazy to me. So the same song sparks some talk of Ka in her mind, also an idea of how powerful it is. I think we've talked a little bit about Ka over the course of the last book, Roland talking with the Ka-tet. But I don't know if, I guess there was a point when Roland said something along the lines of, if they were debating about something happening or not happening, and Ka was mentioned, and Roland said that if it was Ka, then there would be no way to avoid it type thing. So I guess we've kind of gotten this idea before, but this is being stated in a different way, in a more visceral way, I think. Roland kind of felt a little bit more fatalistic, but the voice of her father in her mind basically equating it to like, your plans have as much hope as a small barn against a hurricane, is the wording that she gets. Like, that just feels way more visceral, way more, I don't know, I guess it is still fatalistic a little bit, like it's fate. But I don't know, it just feels way more dangerous, I guess. I don't know, maybe that's just the difference of the plotter that is Roland expressing it versus someone maybe a little bit more romantic in Susan. We don't know enough about her yet to know for sure that's a thing, although a little bit with how she's thought about this whole arrangement with the mayor makes me think that she probably is a little bit more romantic and stuff. And who knows about her dad? We don't know enough about him yet to make a call on that, but definitely maybe that's even just the difference, is Roland's just kind of a, black and white, this is that, versus now hearing it through her mind, even if it's her father's voice, it's in her mind. Maybe that's the difference, is her mind versus his. I also love her expecting him to peak and for questions to start, but in both cases, he proves her expectations wrong. That's just a fun one to me, as was mentioned earlier in the chat. It's just kind of one of those things. There's the games we all play, and it's funny because we all fell into them for the most part. But then it's funny because if you go back and look back at them, and I know it's harder for me because I don't have kids, so I don't necessarily have it in that same way, but I know a lot of people that have kids will see it. And it's funny because whenever you see it, whether it be in a TV show or whatever, and you see things that are very familiar to you when it comes to like the rituals and stuff of childhood courting and stuff, going to dances and how do you ask people out stuff. But now as an adult, you look back on it, it's like that all felt so important when we were that age. But then as you get older, you realize it's all just stupid. It isn't really that important, but we make it out to be like it's the end of the world important. And it's just kind of funny because I don't know, it's the disconnect of the way your brain works when you're younger and in it versus when you could pull away and you could be objective about it and look at it from afar. And I'm sure parents experience that a little bit more because you can live it through your children more versus me. I'm just seeing it like on TV and movie stuff where they're portraying kids, or seeing it. Sometimes I'll see it on social media with like, nephews and stuff, or nieces and cousins, where, you'll see these things and it's like, man, that they find this stuff so important. And it's like, I guess I would have too, when I was that age. But when you're an adult, maybe it's just the adultness of it. You just kind of like roll your eyes a little bit. All right. So moving on to subchapter 4. Let's see. So subchapter 4, she kept silent until they were a mile or so from town. She then asked the question that had been on her mind, and that she had planned to ask after his questions started coming, but they had not come. So now she's finally jumping out of the game a little bit. She's waiting for his questions, and then she was going to answer back with her own. But since he's not asking it, she's got to kind of throw the game plan out the window and just start asking the questions. She asks where he came from and what brought him here. He says no problem, and he is glad to talk, but talking was he wanted to talk, but talking was not his strong suit. He wondered what was his strong suit, and she laid her hands on his pack and felt what might be a gun, and thought of how his hands dropped to his belt earlier on. So I mentioned earlier that we didn't really get an insight from her and like seeing what happened when he reached for his belt. But now we're seeing it in retrospect that she did indeed notice it, and she did clock it that he did reach for his belt. So that's an interesting catch again. She's no fool, this Susan Delgado. Mark in the chat, 100%. I have 3 teenagers and it's funny to watch. Yeah. Again, yeah, it's probably way more, it's probably easier for you to probably see it, but yeah, every time I see it, it just makes me laugh. Cause yeah, it's so funny. Cause you just remember to yourself, like how important that stuff was, to you when you were in it. And it's like, then as an adult, you're just like, man, that's really like, that's the height of importance, is like, asking a date out to this specific dance in the specific way that is the traditional way you have to ask them out for the dance. I remember there's like some dances the girl had to ask, and some dances the boys asked. Most of them the boys asked, but then there was like ones they had to be like super elaborate on how you asked. It was just the rituals of it are all really funny for sure. It all makes me laugh. And it's also funny too, because you almost wonder like how those rituals continue on too, right? Like I guess some kids have their brothers and sisters that are older and that passes on that way, but it's just crazy when you talk to an aunt or an uncle that's older than you, and they kind of know in some cases some of the rituals, and it's like, how those rituals stick around for decades and decades and decades. It's insane. I mean, nowadays there's the internet and stuff, and maybe that stuff can get recorded there, but when we were kids, when I was a kid, that we didn't have that. So it always made me wonder like how these rituals continued on age over age and never really changed. We all played that stupid telephone game where you give a message and whisper it across the circle, and then it's totally different by the end. You'd imagine that might happen, but no, with those rituals, man, they were like religious rituals, and it's like there was some hidden Bible for teenage angst or something that had them all written down, thus saith the Lord type stuff, the way that they stuck so similar. All right, so he says he is from Inworld, and she probably guessed that because they have their own way of talking. She asked which barony, and he said New Canaan, and that excited her, and then because that was the center of the affiliation, and she thinks that that does not mean as much as it used to. But she does marvel though, and she asks, not Gilead, and hating the gushing sound in her own voice. He says no, nothing that grand, but he was from Hemp Hill, which is 40 wheels from Gilead and smaller than Hambry, and maybe even smaller than Hambry. She marvels at the archaic use of the term wheels. She asks what brought him, and he says he is here with 2 friends, Richard Stockworth of Pendleton and Arthur Heath, a hilarious young man from Gilead, and they have come by the order of the affiliation as counters. She asks what they mean to count, and he says anything that may aid the affiliation. He says that Farson's trouble is getting closer to this area, and they need to know what they can count on from Hambry if supplies are demanded. She marvels and says she speaks like and she basically marvels because she says basically Farson's nothing more than a bandit, with his talk of democracy and equality. He says that may have once been true, but now he is a general, and he is what would be a ruler in the name of the people. So he's moved from bandit to general and looking to move from general to ruler in the name of the people. He then tells her the northern and western baronies are in flames. So, wow, that's huge. So going through my notes here, she recalls his hands going to his belt, and it feels what might be guns. So it kind of makes you wonder, is she feeling around in the pack to look for guns, and maybe finding what might be guns? So here's a note. Definitely far too late though, because she's already proven to be very smart. But my note here, she's very smart, very observant, and just seems like she's quick-witted. She's got it. She's not dumb. She's not ditzy. Children certainly can be that. Of course, we don't know everything about her situation. So maybe, I know some kids can't be, reckless or whatever. But they don't necessarily have to be as smart. But she certainly seems to be. So she marvels at his. She also marvels at his usage of the word wheels as a measurement device. So it makes me wonder, do they use miles in this area? It just seems strange because I think we've pretty much heard wheels most of our time in Midworld. And there's been a few times, like I remember Blaine asked, do you guys ken wheels or miles? And Eddie or someone said, oh, we understand miles, so then he gives it to them in miles. So we kind of know, Blaine, you can't really count either, because Blaine kind of exists. He has knowledge of our world and this world. But I just think throughout this time up till this point, I've always just assumed Wheels is what they had in this world, where Miles is what we had in our world. And anytime we had any kind of crossover like Blaine, it was because Blaine had knowledge of our world and was trying to cater to Eddie, Susanna, and Jake. But no, here now we're finding apparently she doesn't use Wheels here in Magus or Hambry, so kind of makes you wonder: have they evolved to Miles in this land? And if so, that certainly redefines my beliefs of how this world works in terms of units of measure, I guess. And then Brocky mentions, but I also remember that something similar with Blaine, where Blaine is when they're asking about his terminating point or something, and he asks, do you guys talk Wheels or you talk Miles? But Brocky's saying something like that might be in the next book as well. I don't think that's spoilery to say, but I do know that Blaine talks that too. So it's definitely an interesting little thing for sure, that we're now seeing that Wheels is not universal in Roland's world. All right, so we got two other names. Again, no reveal yet, but I am assuming that this is Cuthbert and Alan. Also, he calls Arthur Heath hilarious, so that has to be Cuthbert, right? I think the fact that, and I don't know, it feels almost out of character for Roland to talk about someone in that way, that, call him hilarious, because he doesn't have a sense of humor. What did Eddie say? What war was your sense of humor blown off in, or whatever? But again, I wonder if, I don't know. Either way, it's a tip of the cap to us as readers that we already have met Cuthbert. We kind of understand who he is. So for, Will Dearborn here to call out these two names and then call one of them hilarious, I think most of us as readers circle that one and say Cuthbert. So Arthur Heath is most likely Cuthbert. She sees Farson as nothing but a bandit, and he tells her two groups of baronies are burning and it could be moving in this direction. So again, that's huge, because I mean, northern and western baronies, I guess I don't know necessarily what baronies entirely means, but the fact that you're saying northern and western, that feels big to me. That feels broad. That's like saying like the eastern United States, the western United States, northern, whatever. It just feels like you're talking about large swaths. And I know that this world and land that Roland is in it isn't as big as America. It wouldn't be my guess, because America is pretty damn big and spread out. But still, like when you're talking about directional regions, that seems like big chunks of land relative to what their kingdom may look like, would be my guess. So to basically say the northern and western baronies are in flames is nuts. That's alarming. I think we've heard some things. We've heard about the world moving on. We've heard about a lot of different things, but now to be in this time period here and to hear that is very alarming. That shit's not necessarily going Roland's way, the way of his people. It's things maybe going the wrong direction. Also, Farson is tied to democracy and equality, as is mentioned here. That is a very strange thing for us, because those are things that we in our world, as readers and as just human beings, we would value and we would generally call noble and righteous. But here, the enemy of our heroes is the one that's espousing those things. That's very interesting and strange. We're kind of seeing I think I have it written down here in my next part of my note. Also, we know this, the world they have here is a little bit more feudalistic, which is not one that we necessarily view as the most moral, upstanding way to do things. That's an antiquated thing. Most of us agree that feudalism wasn't necessarily a good thing. So King flipping all this shit on its head is very interesting. It kind of makes you uncomfortable, when it's like, okay, in your mind, we've heard of the name Farson a few times. We've heard that it's, he's against the affiliation, he's against Roland, he's against Roland's land and his people. But now to find out that, Roland and his father and everything, the people of Gilead, the people of this larger kingdom are feudalistic, and, that the enemy that they're, fighting, and seemingly is winning and burning large swaths of their kingdom, is representing democracy. That's a very interesting thing from King's perspective. I think it's always so easy to just kind of like paint in colors that are unique or that are very familiar. Make the good guys are the democracy folks, and then the feudalistic are the conquering evil horde that's coming to the gate to destroy the city. Like, that just feels like the way you would generally see it. So to flip that on its head is very unique. It kind of reminds me, in the last like decade or so, George Lucas did an interview with someone, and they were asking him about Star Wars, and he was talking about when he was developing it, that Star Wars was developed in the kind of as a response to Vietnam, and it's that especially became because you have like this large technological empire that's fighting this small ragtag group of freedom fighters, and then eventually lose against a small set of freedom fighters, and he basically pointed that out. And I think that anyone that I've ever seen that's ever tried to like analyze Star Wars from a political perspective is always made uncomfortable, because it seems like the larger militaristic mechanized evil empire is more equating to what we would see like America. That's us. Like, I know not everyone listening is American, but that's just it's an interesting storytelling device, because I don't know, because you almost challenge the viewer or the reader to kind of like, I don't know, squirm a little bit to try to figure out how you reconcile that. Again, we've been cheering for Roland now for 3 full books, and this is the 4th one now. And to find that, and we also know from things that have already been said that this isn't going to go their way. Farson is ultimately going to win. Although we also know that it doesn't end up being a democracy where we see Roland pick up at the beginning of the story, right? So we know it doesn't necessarily, Farson's not necessarily a good person that does actually follow through with democracy and equality, but only destruction comes from it, whatever. But I always find it interesting, the whole idea of kind of flipping it to make it people uncomfortable a little bit about these kind of things. It's an interesting perspective for a writer to do to us as an audience. So going on, she says those problems are thousands of miles away. She was upset, but excited by this conversation, if nothing else, due to how exotic it was. She kind of mentions at this point, the general conversations in Hambry or Magus are very local, things like, head counts of farm, like crop yields, like it's all very small. And so here to be having a conversation about the larger world is very exotic to her. He agrees, but he does say that the wind is blowing in this direction. He then lightens up and says he doesn't think that they'll be seeing John Farson tonight. She playfully asks if they did, would he protect her? And he says, of course, but he would do better if he could call her by her name, the name her parents gave her. So he wants to call her by her first name and not call her Miss Delgado. She playfully agrees and says that she will call him by his name as well. And again, just very, this feels very real to me for kids, especially kids trying to be a little bit more proper and adult-like, which is very common with teenagers too. Nobody wants to be an adult more than a teenager. Even though I would say, as someone that was the same way, I would go, if I can go back and tell myself something, I'd say it's a trap. Live in your childhood. it's funner enjoy it for as long as you can, because adulthood not as fun as you thought it'd be when you're a teenager. So then Roland trips and Rusher rears a bit, and the poncho is shifted and it reveals her bare leg. He sees it before she adjusts it back. He apologizes and says he apologizes. He says he's not a clumsy person, and then he kind of changes the subject by saying he will need to count the oil patch. And she says she will save him the time and she says there's 19 working derricks. He thanks her, but says they will need to see how much oil they bring up as well. She marvels and asks if New Canaan has enough machines that run on oil for that to matter, and if they did, and if they still remembered how the alchemy to change it into the stuff that machines needed. He tells her it is called refinery, not alchemy, and he says that there is not much left that uses oil, but mentions some lights. She marvels as the last spark light, as she mentions it, which would be an electric light in our parlance. The last spark light in this area went out 2 generations ago. So that's wild. So yeah, they do use miles. She just said in this section. She talked about miles. She says Farson stuff's 1,000 miles away. So very interesting. Again, up front, I always assumed miles was our world and Wheels was theirs, but now here we're upsetting that apple cart a little bit and saying, nope, there are parts of this world that do indeed use miles. And honestly, I don't know that I've ever really clocked that in my mind until doing this book club. So I think I've always just kind of gone over that, wheels, miles, and all just kind of like, I'm not a cartographer, so I'm not sitting there, not like Chris from Australia that's actually made the map for this. So I think I just let those numbers roll through my head. It's like, 1,000 wheels, 1,000 miles, whatever it is. I just, okay, that's a long ways away, or that's a short ways away, whatever the number they're saying. But I've never really clocked until actually doing the research. That's why I love doing these book clubs, because it allows the nitty gritty discovery of things, and to really analyze small sections of text and see what nuggets of treasure are buried in them. Let's see. King is so good at writing these two so genuine. They both feel like awkward teens. He captured it so well, and I know that was mentioned earlier in the chat too, but that was my note here too. Just everything. I mean, Roland tripping. I mean, we know Roland's not clumsy. I mean, we know him as an adult, I guess. We don't know him as much as a kid, so maybe he was clumsier and isn't. But I would assume that what he's saying is true. I don't think he really is a clumsy person. I think that was just a mistake, just something that happened. Just whatever. It's not indicative of his character. But yeah, King captures this whole thing so well with these two. Let's see. And then Baraki is also saying, let's see. Or David says in the 5th book, somebody asks Eddie if they know wheels or miles. Okay, so maybe I'm conflating Blaine, because I thought it was Blaine that asked them when he was talking about his overall run, whatever it was that he was talking about, the from point A to point B with Blaine, but maybe it's something else. Baraki says, according to Bev Vincent, the Dark Tower compendium, which actually I do have. I got to remember I have that so I can just pull it out at any time and use it as well. One wheel is about 1.1 miles, so until large numbers, the distances are pretty much equal. That's good to know too. But yeah, I think that so maybe there is some more future things when it comes to wheels and miles, but definitely something that I've never really, I guess I've always up to this point thought wheels is our world, miles is our world, wheels is their world. And if we get into book 5 and what David's saying in the chat is correct as well, then I guess I completely missed that entirely, because I thought it was Blaine, and Blaine's a wild card because he knows shit from our world. In fact, when he quizzes the deans to prove that they're from New York, because it's something that he knows, he seems to kind of know, and things that they are going to say, he knows if those are real things of our world or not. So because he basically doesn't believe that they're from our world. So it's interesting. So maybe there is more. Indeed, well, I'll have to look into that for sure. But it's definitely a unique thing. And again, I don't think I've ever really clocked before that there is a difference here, with Magus versus Roland's land of Gilead. Let's see. Davis says, I think I've read the series 15 times. I just realized something in the 7th book that I've never realized before. Blew my mind. Yeah, and that's what I love about revisiting this series, and that's what I love about these book clubs too, because sometimes slowing down, like I do with these book clubs, helps a lot as well. But there's other times I'm just listening normal pace, and something will just hit me. I honestly don't know. I don't know what my count is. I really wish I would have kept count over the years. But I do think I'm upwards, probably pretty close to what you're saying, David. I'm thinking, I think I've been saying around a dozen a couple years back on the podcast, but that was always a guess. And I know I've clocked a few more cycles since then. So I would say, yeah, somewhere in the mid-teens to high teens maybe. And still, I would say the last 4 or 5 times I've read it, I think I pulled something new from it, whether it be a new interpretation of something or something entirely that just I completely miss. Like, this is a very and I wouldn't say, I don't like saying the word dense, because I think dense says something totally different. Like in my mind, like a lot of high fantasy, some people love the high fantasy stuff, but I think there's a density to a lot of high fantasy, or even Tolkien's super freaking dense. And I think sometimes there's density at the expense of readability. And this series is infinitely readable, but I think there's a density to it to where, like, with further rereads and really diving into it, I think you could really gain a lot from it, pull a lot of really interesting ideas and thoughts and all that kind of stuff out of it. So I guess dense isn't the right word, because I think that conveys the wrong thing. But I think there is a lot to there's a lot of layers to this series that you get over time that you may miss the first time, because there's just a lot of stuff to take in, and it's easy to lose some stuff as you're kind of chugging through it. Let's see. I've got to be careful about the chat as well if we're going to be talking about anything in the future. I don't want to mention it here on the show. Let's see. that's all from the future. I can read some of this stuff in the spoiler section, which will be coming up shortly-ish. So again, my last note here. So again, so a while, 2 generations ago, Hambry's last light bulb went dead. Not saying the timeline has to jive with ours, but it is so disorienting for me, especially as one that's kind of a history buff. I mean, 2 generations ago, I guess that isn't necessarily that's not like 600 to 800 years or whatever, like 600 years plus like Setgo, but still light bulbs, our last light bulb burning out two generations ago, like that's wild to me. Sorry, there's something, there we go. Something was on my mic, and it was like just catching my eye with the light, and it was annoying me. All right, so that is it for that. Let me go on to the next little section here. He then asks her if her father was Patrick Delgado, based on her saying that he managed the horses for the mayor before his death. She is shocked back to reality and asks how he knows that. He says that they were told his name, as they needed to count livestock as well. And he offers her his condolences. She accepts them. He asks if his death was an accident, and she says it was, but has a very heavy leave it alone tone in her voice. He said that he was going to be honest with her, and she knew how so often in life when people said that they're about to lie to you. She basically says something along the lines of, if they say, let me be honest with you, likely the next thing they're going to say is the rain falls up type stuff. So she's definitely very keen on that phrase, not necessarily being a true indicator of truth, which is generally a reality that I've found in life too. He smiled, and she thought his smile was dangerous, a quicksand smile that was easy to wander into but impossible to get out of. He tells her there's little affiliation in the affiliation these days, and that is why Farson has gone as far as he has, and he has come a long way from his Harrier stage robbing in Garland and DeSoy. He then says the affiliation has not sent them; their fathers had, and she understood that that meant they were bad boys who had been given a make work quest that was not quite exile. And their real job here was to rehab their reputation. She had cut a caper or two, or multiple dozen, it says, in her own time, and felt sympathy for him, but interest as well. She asked if they had been helling, and he agreed and said that there had been drinking. She wondered if there was also girls involved as well, but she could not ask that. He tells a tale about one night, things getting wild, and a drunken ride on a horse who caught his hoof in a gopher hole and snapped its leg and had to be put down. And that it was a thoroughbred, one of the 3 owned by Richard's father, who was not rich. She winced at how bad this was, and then said that they were, and basically then said, yes, so you guys are here for punishment then. Understanding. There's a lot of understanding here. This isn't something he has to necessarily spell out. Just giving her a little bit there is enough for her to kind of fill in the blanks and understand the story a little bit more. So, let's see. David said a typical generation is usually between 22 and 32 years long. Yeah, so you're talking a good while. For that long ago for the last light bulb to have burned out is that's not a short time. That's not like, oh, last year our last light bulb burned out. No, that's a while ago. So my notes wise, just like with Rhea, her dad, here Roland gets a very violent reaction, not truly violent, but violent-ish, because it's a very raw nerve, her dad is, and it's still a very raw nerve. We talked about it when Rhea brought it up. We talked about, because it mentioned how long ago it had been since he had died. I think it's something like 7 or 8 years between her dad dying and now. So it's been some time. You'd almost imagine it wouldn't be as raw, but it certainly is. So and now Roland is finding that out as well, as we already kind of knew because of Rhea. My next note, he asks if it was an accident. That's an interesting thing to ask. It certainly got my mind wondering the first time reading it. It didn't take me long to then forget about that wondering as the story moved on. But I remember when he asks that, it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, I don't know why ask that, I guess. I don't know. It just makes my ears perk up if you're going to ask that. Just made me wonder there for a bit, even though I probably forgot by the next chapter, so I probably that exited my mind the first time reading it, but it did enter my mind there for a second where it's like, wait a minute, was it an accident? Some not great let's see, some not so great world building. I mean, it's good in terms of world building, but it's not good because of what it is portending here. But we hear about Farson's growth and growing support. It's not good for Roland's perspective for sure and his point of view, but it's good world building done by Stephen King to show us kind of the growth that Farson is seeing and moving from literally a stage robber, robbing stagecoaches, which is pretty, small time crime, to up to being a little bit bigger, to now he's a general, to he wants to be the ruler. Like that's a meteoric rise for a rapscallion. So then my next note, to see her quickness and understanding what being sent by their fathers meant, tells me that most will probably assume the same thing about them. Not to say that she's not smart or intelligent, because she certainly is. She's proven that a shitload in this episode. But I think that the fact that she's so easily able to pick up like the overall gist of the story makes me think this is kind of a normal thing. Like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of it. But we all, even in the real world, there's those certain euphemisms, or there's those certain things that people say, and you just kind of know what they mean, truthfully underneath. And I feel like that's kind of the vibe I'm getting here. Again, not because Susan's not smart, because I know she is, but there's just the fact that she's able to basically build the entire story out with very little given from him. Tells me that that part of their plan here is probably that they'll have their cover story for their cover story, because their top level cover story is we're here to count, but the bottom level cover story that they will eventually reveal to people most likely is they were sent here by their fathers. Everyone's going to take that to figure out these guys are probably in trouble and are basically serving their penance, and then ultimately their true reason is obviously even underneath that, but their hope would be that would never come out, obviously, that they're just trying to hide Roland from Flag. But very interesting. My last note here, thoroughbred is pretty sought after in our world. How much more so in a world of muty creatures being very common, and the fact that threaded stock is so rare, let alone thoroughbred. So I think that not only would that be like a wince in our world, but in a world of muties where like Roland is ordering burgers in the first book, and they say it's threaded stock, and in his mind he's like, threaded stock my ass, and like there's this element of like threaded stock is very rare. So to say thoroughbred, to be on top of that even more, makes me think that's an ouchie. That would be a brutal thing to have to deal with having done if you were in this world, I would imagine. So she asks if he is there officially yet, and he says no, they had just arrived, and she is the first person they've encountered, unless the others have met someone that he is unaware of. He tells her where they are camping. She calls it the drop and realizes that they are camping on the land that might one day be hers before too long. He says tomorrow they will ride into town and present themselves to the mayor, who they were told is a fool, and she asks if that is indeed what they were told, and he says yes, apt to blabber, fond of strong drink, and of young girls. And he asks if that is correct, and she says that he can make his own judgments. She tells him the mayor will have a dinner for them in the next night or two, and then he jokes about his anticipation and how can he possibly wait for such a thing. His smile drops, and it says that she sees who he will become in only a few, or even for a few moments, she sees a window into the man that he will become in the future, which is the man that we know, I think, the Roland that we're familiar with. She says if they are to be friends, they should meet at that dinner as if it were their first time. He agrees, and she doesn't answer any questions about her position. She warns him of the 3 new ones who are hanging around the mayor and his chancellor as a bodyguard to the mayor. She says they are hard boys, and the eldest limps. She says that they have probably done more helling, I guess is the word that they used earlier. She asked Roland if they had been helling, and she basically says that they've probably done more helling than he and his friends will ever be able to do in their entire life. Just the gist that she gets from them. She is not sure why she told him this. She wonders why someone in this small area, but then he wonders why someone in this small area would need bodyguards for the mayor. Because he does ask, like, wait, are they like sworn in law officers. She says, no, they're just bodyguards for the mayor. And he does find that peculiar, because why would a mayor of such a small town need 3 ruffians as bodyguards? They begin to see the light of the town, and Hey Jude is carrying in on the wind from the inn, which we've heard previous as the Traveler's Rest. The 3 dangerous men, Susan thinks, would be in the bar right now, but they would not be singing. And she also tells them about the coffin tattoos tattooed on the webbing of their fingers, between their thumb and forefinger. They reach the mailbox, and they hear a whinnying sound. And again, he reaches toward his empty belt, and a warbling sound. I guess whinnying's the wrong term. Whinnying would be a horse, but it's the thinny essentially. We'll find out here, but it's the warbling of the thinny. He asks what in the hell that is, basically, and she says it's a thinny and it's in Eyebolt Canyon. She says they don't often hear it so clear this time of year, and in the fall men burn it to quiet. He says he doesn't understand what that means. She says they gather up brush and build it up at the mouth of Eyebolt Canyon and burn it into the canyon. As it is a box canyon that is very short and very steep walled. He asks her how long it has been there. She says longer than she's been alive, but not before her father was alive. So sometime in her father's lifetime. He had told her it came with what felt like an earthquake, is what her father had told her. She also says that the brush and the shrubs they lay also work out to block the animals from going in, as for some weird reason that she couldn't understand, they are drawn by it, and they will be drawn into it if they're not stopped. So there's a lot here. So first of all, Hey Jude, I have to mention that's not the first time we've heard this song in this world, but hearing it again and in an earlier setting than we've heard it before, still very strange. I've been listening to a lot of Beatles recently, so it's fresh in my mind, the Beatles in general. But I do suppose, as a big fan of the Beatles, if there is one aspect of popular music that was going to be carried over to Roland's World, outside I think it's ZZ Top too, but I guess the Beatles is the right one to be carried over as well. So her asking him to conspire is interesting. She is still ashamed of meeting him like this, perhaps. I mean, we know her predicament, even though Roland doesn't. But it's kind of interesting. I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know what her overall worry is. I guess meeting someone, maybe it is just the fact that they're out here alone. I guess I know she's in a precarious situation. She has to protect herself. But it is very interesting to me that she's basically asking for him to conspire. Here with the whole thing and with how they're meeting for the first time in the future. So then him telling her what Thorin's reputation is a bit awkward, since we obviously know what her predicament is. Sorry about that, if that came through on the audio. So him telling her, it's just super awkward, because we know her predicament. We know she's promised to him. So for her to kind of have that told to her, and the fact that she's now hearing, like, not only we know she has negative thoughts about him, but now for her to find out, like, hey, in the faraway lands, like, his is the reputation, that the man that you're sworn to, this is his reputation. Like, I just don't think would be a fun thing for her to hear. So that feels very awkward. Next, Eyebolt Canyon and the Thinny. So now we get a good connection to the present story, which is why Roland was triggered into his memories when he heard the Thinny in Nebraska, on the other side of the book here, the first chunk that we'd covered. So that kind of connects that all together. Animals are drawn into the canyon and the Thinny. That is a bit scary. I can only imagine what that might be like. And then my last note for this little portion here, also, it is old, but not crazy old. It arrived in her father's lifetime. Feels like it might be a lot older than that, would be my general assumption. So for the fact that it isn't, is very interesting. It's just, that it cropped up so recent, relatively, right? Like, yeah, she's, 15, 16, something like that. So not in her lifetime, but in her father's lifetime. So you're not talking about something that's all that old. Like someone, my age, that would have probably been in my lifetime, even if I was a very young child. So Next section or next going on here, she gets off the saddle in a liquid move, but one that is meant for pants, not a dress, and she could tell by the look in his eyes that he got an eyeful, but nothing that she had to wash with the bathroom door closed. So she figured it was no big deal. That's definitely a funny way to think of things. He commends her move, her action there, being able to get off the saddle like she did, and she says that her dad taught her. He asks if she has seen the thinny. She says a few times from above. And he asks what it looked like, and she says it was ugly, like a slow burning peat fire or a swamp of green water with mist rising off of it, and sometimes with little thin arms, which that is all very creepy indeed. He asks if it is growing, and she says yes, but slowly, and it won't outgrow the canyon in either of their times. She thinks how unfair it is that in her mind, she's thinking to herself how unfair it is. Only now she finally meets someone who she has some real interest in. She remembers her father's voice saying that cause like a wind and no plan will stand against it, but she would not forsake her honor just because she met a cute boy. She says she will leave him here and reminds him of the promise to keep the next time they meet will be the first time. He asks if he can visit her and bring her flowers, and she says no. And he asks if she has promised to be married, and he says that he understands that is very forward of him to ask, and she says that she won't answer that, and her position is delicate. They exchange pleasantries, and without thinking, she kisses him. It was brief but not sisterly. He tells her he looked forward to meeting her for the first time. He mounts up and begins to slowly ride away. She watches him and hopes for him to turn and wave so she could see his face once more. But it seems that he won't. But just before he is out of sight, he does turn and wave. She waves back and feels both happy and unhappy. But the important thing is she no longer felt soiled. When she kissed him, the touch of Rhea left her skin. So that is that section. Mark says in the chat, I did find it strange that Roland didn't know about it. Didn't know about it if it appeared so recently. I would imagine. I think there's definitely a thought that I don't know. Kind of get a sense that I guess I don't know what the general flow of things looks like. Like how often are delegates from like the inner baronies going to these outer reaches and stuff, and like of course now with John Farson coming and the world is moving on, we've heard that already. It kind of makes you wonder if like maybe 1,000 years ago this maybe would have looked different than it does now. But yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of see like what does Roland know and not know about this area. So my notes here, this just feels so special. Nothing King is saying here necessarily again makes it out and calls it out that it's special. He's not being cheap about it. But this all just feels so real, so raw, and also it just feels important. I remember the first time reading it, it's like, I don't know how the story is going to play out. But this feels like, Jack and Rose meeting in Titanic, or Romeo and Juliet, not hoping that pretends the future of what we're going to see in this story. But I remember the reading it the first time, and it just felt like you have those moments in certain stories when two characters meet and it just feels heavy. And this felt heavy the first time I read it. I remember that being a thing. So, then going on, my next note, he is asking to visit her with flowers, is showing us that he is indeed falling for her. I know this is a younger version of the character, but damn, this is so unlike everything we've known about Roland. Of course, yeah, we totally accept this is a young Roland. This is not the Roland that we've seen that has millions of miles and grizzled and all that fun stuff. But man, it's an interesting thing to see a different version of this character because we know him so well at this point. Then my next note, the kiss. If it feels like a momentous thing up to this point, if it didn't feel like a momentous thing up to this point, which I think it already did, it certainly feels even bigger now with the kiss. And then I also love that last bit of her feeling unsoiled and no longer feeling the touch of Rhea on her, because honestly, we don't know very much about this girl yet, but I do feel a lot of empathy, and I feel sorry for her for a lot of the nasty shit that we've already been exposed to. So for her to feel better even temporarily through this chance meeting, I think it's definitely a good thing, and I'm glad to have had it happen. Okay, so I got one more section to do, and then we'll get into the spoiler section, and I know this is moving on into another chapter, so that will put us middle of a chapter, which is going to just be the reality, unfortunately. Not all these chapters are super neat that we can easily fit into one episode. But chapter 4, and this one is titled Long After Moonset, and we'll do subchapter 1 and then the spoiler section, and we'll call it a day. So he rode for 2 hours back to what she called the drop, never going more than a trot. He turned his horse down the slope to a brook, and another horse wickered, and Rusher wickered back, and he saw a narrow, inhuman white face hanging in front of him, and his hands dipped for his guns for the 3rd time tonight. But he realized what it was, the idiotic rook's skull. Arthur Heath, as he is calling himself, had taken it from his saddle and had hung it as a prank greeting. He then called the skull, or he also thought that Arthur called the skull his lookout. 1 second here. I just thought I screwed up my text, so I hit Control Z and it moved me way back to the top. Sorry. Let's see. So Arthur Heath, he had called the skull his lookout. Roland batted it hard enough to break the string and send it flying. Cuthbert called out to him and told him that is some way to treat the guard of the watch. And he had smacked the poor thing halfway to the nearest mountain range. Roland said that if he had his gun, he would have shot it to smithereens and woken half the countryside. Cuthbert said that he knew he would not go out strapped. He then called him Roland, and Roland said that they had agreed to use their fake names even amongst each other. Cuthbert bowed, apologizing, and called him Gunslinger, and Roland scolded him and said, "Don't call him that again, not here or anywhere, if he valued him." He apologized again, and Roland said no harm done and slapped him on the shoulder, asked where Alan was, and Cuthbert said Dick, he means, and pointed to the snoring shadow and said that he would sleep through anything. Cuthbert had heard Roland approaching and had woken up. So back to camp, and slightly startled by a rook's skull, and of course Cuthbert has a name for it and calls it, and then ended up calling it here the camp guard. Again, who doesn't love Cuthbert? Roland is touchy about being called Gunslinger, probably right though, since they are out here to ultimately for him to hide. So I think the worst possible thing that could happen would be him to be recognized, by name, like if someone were to call him Roland Deschain. That'd be the worst thing, but the second worst thing would probably be to call him Gunslinger, because if Flag has spies out there and he's looking for him, they need to be incognito. So the worst thing would be to call him by his real name. The second worst thing would be to call him Gunslinger, most likely. So I totally get that. We're getting a bit of the dynamic between the three here as well. There is a warmth with these two. We obviously have already seen these two previously. We saw them in the flashback in book 1. We've heard Roland refer to Cuthbert a few different times in regards to Eddie, so we kind of understand that we've both seen Cuthbert being funny, but we've also heard Roland constantly talk about, man, you're just like Cuthbert, you joke all the time. But then also Alan just being the one that is just sleeping away. It kind of gives us a little bit of a dynamic, but we will have more to find out as we go, certainly, as right now we're only seeing two-thirds of the group actually awake right now. So going on, Cuthbert asks if something happened to him while he was gone and said that he looked different. Roland plays coy, and he figured that if there was a time to tell Cuthbert about Susan, it was now, but at the spur of the moment, he decided not to share it and figured that if they were to meet for the first time at Mayor's house, no sense in telling Cuthbert about it now. He tells him he has aired out and had seen some interesting things. Cuthbert asks to be told, and Roland says that he will tell tomorrow, so he only has to tell it once. But he does share one thing. He says there are too many horses in these parts, too many by far. We also see some carrier pigeons, and Roland asks if they are all right. Bert says they are fine, pecking and shitting. He tries to follow up Roland's comment about horses, but Roland tells him tomorrow. Roland lays down but could not sleep. And then he starts to think about the horrors room, which is a month prior. That's interesting too, because it gives us a little bit of a timeline of things. I know that throughout the story, we've had very few times that King actually gives us legit time call outs like that, but there is one of them. And of Farson, who seemed to appear and disappear like he was made of smoke. He thought how they all saw Farson as a real threat now, or if you believed basically, if you're a believer of his, you believed in his idea of, quote, class slavery and the ancient fairy tales, which is an interesting way to paint Roland's belief system and the lay of the land as it is now. If you were someone that believed it that way, you would have called him a real agent of change. He thought how his father and his Tet cared very little about Farson and found him small cheese. His father had told him that little places were still safe in the land, but Magus was the safest place he could think of, and he would send him with a land, but begged for Cuthbert not to be the other companion that he would go with, because he calls Cuthbert a fool, and he tells Roland that he'd be better off to bring a barking dog than to bring Cuthbert, which obviously we've already been shown that Cuthbert does show up, so he does not take his father's advice there, thank God, because we need more Cuthbert in our lives. Roland would have normally been happy to go, but if the final battle was coming down the pike, he wanted to stay and be part of it. They had talked about much, but the Dark Tower was not mentioned by either of them. Roland wondered about it, but dared not ask his father about it. He thought again about the kiss from Susan. Then he thought about the whore who took his virginity but would not kiss him. She would turn her face aside anytime he tried. A voice in his head told him to be careful. She was not free, talking about Susan, not married per se, but spoken for in some way. He told himself he wanted her, not the way that he wanted the whore, but the way that he wants food when he's hungry or water when he's thirsty. He went to sleep thinking about her in the romantic and hopeless way that only teenagers truly can. So then my notes here, Cuthbert knows Roland well. He sees something different about him, even if he is not sure what it is. I think that just shows kind of the closeness of these two friends. Not to say that Roland isn't maybe, actually showing some differences, but I think that the really close people to us, whether it be loved ones or friends or whoever, those are usually the ones that can suss out if something is different about us. Roland not sharing with Cuthbert about Susan, not sure how well that will work out. It just seems to me in general when it comes to pop culture, books, movies, video games, whatever, whenever there's a time that secrets should be told, it always seems like it turns out bad if it's not told then. Roland thinks that there are too many horses here. That is very ominous. I don't know what their general expectation, kind of like we mentioned earlier, somebody in the chat, I'm trying to remember who kind of mentioned, not really sure how Roland doesn't know about some of this stuff. We ultimately don't know like what the real relationship is here. So it's like, how does he know there's too many horses? I don't know. It's an interesting thing that brings up some questions that we don't necessarily have answers to, at least not yet. So Farson seems like a legend, the ability to appear and disappear. It is troubling that Roland's dad and his Tet don't seem worried about him. Kind of reminds me of like watching Game of Thrones, early in the War of the Five Kings, Robb Stark is, like legends are building about him. Like he can't be beaten. He can turn into a wolf. There's all these legends and, like Farson being thought of here where it's like, he's like smoke that can just appear and disappear. And just, whatever. And he's obviously doing well. Like he's burned 2 whole regions that are in flames now and stuff. So it seems really strange to me that Roland's father and his quartet don't really seem to care about Farson, because it really seems like Farson should be something to be concerned about. I love Stephen not wanting Roland to take Cuthbert. It just makes me laugh. But then again, in my mind, if he was really that concerned about Cuthbert, would he not have ordered him not to take him? I don't know. It just seems like that was could be a prerogative for Stephen to just say, no, you're not taking Cuthbert. I won't allow it. But the fact that he kind of leaves it up to Roland. But again, thank God, because Stephen would have potentially made this a much less interesting story, because what little we've seen of Cuthbert so far, I remember being very excited to see more of him moving into this story. So the Dark Tower again gets a mention here, but still no clarity given about it to us. Wild that we are so far in, yet knows so little about the titular object of the story. Kind of makes me think of like Lord of the Rings, right? We know that King wrote both The Stand and this as ways to kind of like mimic Tolkien. The Stand being like the American, Lord of the Rings with a long journey and all that kind of stuff. This, kind of being his large magnum opus, kind of like Lord of the Rings would be for Tolkien. It's just wild. Like, imagine if you were midway through the second book and they hadn't like talked about the ring at all yet. I know it's a different story. But it just feels like, the Ring and Lord of the Rings, like you pretty much know a lot about it, everything you need to know about it pretty early on. And here we are reading through. I remember the first time kind of getting frustrated at a certain point, because it's like, this is the title of the stuff. I mean, I know it's not the title of the books, but the overall gist of this is the Dark Tower series. Why the fuck do we not know hardly anything about this damn Dark Tower yet? And we're I mean, we're in the 4th book out of 7. I mean, I know we're early on here, but we're in, about the point we are now. We're 25% through the 4th book. So we are coming up on the halfway mark, and we have still not heard much about this tower and what it means and what this ultimate journey that Roland's on is really about. So that is a tiny bit frustrating. Then my last note, Roland comparing his experience with the whore and with Susan and seeing the difference between the two is something, between something real and something that is not. That's really cool. Just, it shows a maturity for him, I guess. I don't know, like, again, kids, like, they have a certain way of thinking. And for Roland, like, you may you wouldn't even hold it against him if he didn't really see, like, the massive difference. But the fact that he's actually able to discern the difference between, like, the emotional reality of the infatuation that he has for Susan versus just paying, a lady to sleep with him. Like, the fact that he's able to discern that difference is good for being a young hormonal person. I give him some credit for that. So that is it. So we do have the spoiler section, but that is it for what we're covering. Looks like we did pretty good in terms of time too. I was like a little bit concerned because the next subchapter here I was thinking about adding percentage wise. I'm kind of glad I didn't with where we're at with the runtime, but it was also a lot longer of a subchapter as well. So I was like, oh god, I hope I don't end up super short because I left this subchapter off, but it worked out well. So that is where we will leave it for now. But let's jump on over to the spoilers section.
Warning, spoilers ahead. Warning, spoilers ahead. Warning, spoilers ahead.
Okay, sorry, I don't know why that was so quiet. That seemed really quiet. I don't know. But either way, the spoiler warning, we are now moving into the spoiler section. And this was actually mentioned earlier in the chat as well. So you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but if I can find the damn thing in the chat here. So it was asking, Mark said, did King go back in and insert that 19? And then Baraki says, yeah, I'm pretty sure that was a different number pre-edit version. So the thing is, did he edit anything outside of the first book? I didn't think that he did. And my note was actually in the spoiler section, it's funny, it was I wonder what King's fascination is with the number 19. In the post-accident books, it seems to make sense due to the date of the accident, but this is before, and there are 19 derricks working. There's also been a few other references earlier in the books as well, but it is wild, seemingly their coincidence, the fact that he actually uses the number 19. I don't know if that was like an important age for him or something, or like, I don't know if it's just like a talismanic number for him, but it really sure seems to be that 19 crops up even before the accident when it becomes obviously a large storytelling perspective. Of course, we're going to discount the first book because we do know that one was rewritten, but I was under the impression that he didn't go through and rewrite and edit these books. I mean, doesn't he, outside of the first one, because doesn't he usually call these like the first drafts and stuff? So, I mean, of course, we can certainly call it versus coincidence, but it is very interesting that 19 does crop up, and I think it cropped up in the last book too. I think there was something in Lud or something that had a number 19 somewhere, and I think we talked about it in the book club episode that we covered it because it was like, wait, why is this showing up? Why is 19 the number here? Because, but again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe King actually did go back and rewrite these, but I didn't think that he ever did. I don't know. I would have to rely on someone that might have access to a first edition or something, but it kind of makes me wonder though, because 19 does show up throughout King's works. It's not all over the place. It's not like blue chambray shirts by any means, but we do see it often enough even outside of the Dark Tower. It kind of makes me wonder if it's like, I know it wouldn't be like his age when he first published, because I think didn't he have some poetry published earlier than age 19? I don't know. And then like there's the whole intro to these books where it's like on being 19, and he talks about being, 19 years old and how magical that is and stuff, kind of taking on the world. You don't have the weight of the world crushing you yet. Like, so I feel like there's some infatuation with the number 19, but even if that was a separate thing, like say that is, and that's just something that he's always kind of liked, but then for him to then be hit by a car on the 19th of June 1999 is insane. Like the coincidence there is nuts. So pretty wild. Let's see, let me check with the chat. There was some stuff here that looked like it was going to be spoilery. let's see. Let me go find it here. And then David said, I only bring that up because I just finished it this morning, thinking about something that blew your mind. Baraki said, spoilers from book 5. So Eddie said, and drew a curve in the dirt. These are the borderlands. The Kala is an arc that goes north and south for how far, Zalia? 'Tis men's business, so it is, she said. Then seeing your own man is still at the embering fire, inspected the pots and leaned towards the towers. Do you speak in miles or wells? Okay, so it is there too. I swear it's also with Blaine. So yeah, that's good though. I missed that. I just finished a reread not too long ago, but maybe I just, whenever I get that, maybe I just conflate it in my mind that it was Blaine that also asked that too. So that's good. That's a good call out. I was definitely missing that one. So good call on that. And then David says at this point, it's just something I put on in the background to listen to if I'm trying to go to sleep. And that's not a bad way to go, man. I used to, back in my younger days, would like have a TV in my bedroom, and I would just do the same thing. I'd throw like Simpsons episodes on, and I had like and I still have them. They're behind me here. I have like seasons 1 through 15 or something, and I would just go disc to disc, throw it on, play an episode. I wouldn't necessarily even like stay up and watch it, but it would be playing, and then it would like I'd turn my TV on a timer to shut off after a couple hours and play the 4 episodes on each disc, and then whatever. And it was weird. It ingrained it in my brain even more than it already was. I mean, I watched The Simpsons a shitload, so I didn't necessarily need it, but I almost like I would feel like I was even more like sharp with Simpsons references then than I am now, where I don't do that anymore. So I do think there is something to that, and that's an interesting idea. I've never really thought of doing that with something like Dark Tower. Maybe I should though. That's awesome though. But yeah, so that's all I really had for the spoiler section. Nothing else really came to mind that was super spoilery, but that 19 did jump out at me as very interesting and perplexing. So yeah, that is let me go ahead and hit the okay, a couple things. First of all, I want to mention before I get into the outro stuff, I did throw something out. If you are if you listen along with Geekery Abides, I am delaying the Geekery Abides episode till next week. I only found out very late, very recent, that my family Christmas party is tonight. So after I'm done here, I'm going to get ready and go do that. So I don't have the ability to do Geekery Abides tonight, and I have too much stuff going tomorrow. So I'm going to do it next week. That wasn't necessarily planned. My family, there is no minute like the last minute, which drives me crazy sometimes, but that is life. So no Geekery Abides episode today. Look for it next week. I already changed the schedule for it there, but if you are listening live and you intended to go over and listen to that, just know that won't be until next week. Which still works though, because we're covering Christmas movies, and next week will be the 23rd, so we'll be right on Christmas Eve. So got that I wanted to cover, and then also I mentioned it once before, but I'll mention it again. I'll have all the dates worked out in terms of what 2024 looks like. So the next book club episode is going to be the second episode of January. I don't know what the date that is going to be yet. But as soon as probably in a fortnight from now, once I get that worked out, we'll announce it on the year-end bash, and you'll know if you want to continue following along with the book club episodes. Hopefully with us on the roundtables too. But if not, mid-January somewhere, we will be covering number 9 for Wizard and Glass. So. Yeah, looking forward to that. Baraki says my family Christmas party's tonight too. I guess it makes sense, but in my mind, for some fucking reason, I keep thinking that Christmas is 2 weeks away and not a week away. So I keep thinking like, God damn it, Christmas party, it seems too early for that. But no, it's really not. Like, Christmas is just sneaking up on me. So this seems like the perfect time for it. And it was really weird too, because my work Christmas party I missed because I was in Arizona last week. They did it last week, which was the 8th, I think is what it was. And I was like, December 8th, that's like a weird day for a Christmas party. It seems way too early, but I don't know. This whole month is like breezing by. So yeah, we will be back for Geekery Abides next week. So it's an off week for one of the shows, but we'll be talking Christmas movies, and we'll be back in a fortnight. I'll be back in a fortnight for the year-end bash. And then with announcements for what 2024 looks like, what dates will be recording live. Let me go ahead and hit the outro stuff real quick. If you want to subscribe to us, You can do that on any podcasting service of your choice. You can stream us on Spotify, Stitcher, or not Stitcher anymore. Stitcher's dead. On Spotify, anything like Amazon Music, Audible, all those fun places. You can live stream the shows here at youtube.com/darktowerpalaver. If you miss a live stream, you can always come back and rewatch the video. I do post them as normal YouTube videos after the fact. If you are on those, watching them in the future, feel free to leave comments if you have input as well. I always try to keep an eye on the comment section as well. Hasn't been necessarily the biggest thing comment-wise, but I do try to keep track of them as much as I can. Then if you want to find the hub for all things Dark Tower Palaver, the link to our merchandise, our show notes, everything Dark Tower Palaver, it's darktowerpalaver.com. If you want to support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/darktowerpalaver. And then if you want to contact the show, you can reach out. Like if you want to give ideas, that reminds me, I am going to screen grab. Where was it at? Okay, there we go. David gave me some ideas. I'm going to screen grab it. I should have thought of that earlier. Screen grab it. Now it'll be saved on my computer. Your references to what we should do for the March Insanity 2024. Get those sent in, though, if you want to do that. The show at darktowerpalaver.com. Send that email in. If you have any ideas, let me know. I'll compile the best ideas. I am going to keep a list, too. So if one of them you really love and I don't pick it, don't worry. It's going to be in a list. I'm actually going to make sure to keep that list. So in the future, I don't know, maybe we could even announce, like, hey, next year, a year from now, we're going to be doing this next topic. We won't wait till the end of the year like now. So any ideas I will take because, I don't know. I think sometimes I have good ideas and every once in a while, like we'll throw it out to you guys and you guys will come up with something and I'll be like, holy shit, that's way better than anything I would have thought of. So, welcome those, send them in on the email. If you want to find the show on social media, it's, facebook.com/darktowerpalaver, on Twitter at darktowerpod, at darktowerpod, and on Instagram at darktowerpalaver. Also, I always keep forgetting I need to add Blue Sky to the whole rundown as well. But just look us up at Dark Tower Palaver. We're on Blue Sky as well. If Twitter seemingly is always spiraling and on the verge of collapsing, if that happens, Blue Sky will be the place to be replacement wise, I believe. So that is all the social media stuff. Have a good Christmas, holidays of any kind, whatever you celebrate, enjoy it. Festivus is always a fun one. We don't really have a lot of I guess we have like some holidays in the Dark Tower, but not anything that equates to Christmas necessarily. But enjoy it whatever you can if you are just a Dark Tower listener, not a Geekery Abides listener. This will be the last time I see you until after the holiday and right before New Year's. So if that's the case, happy Christmas, happy holidays. Have a good one. Enjoy it. If you're here somewhere where you're going to get snow, I hope you have a white Christmas. Unless you don't want it, then I hope you have a dry Christmas. Who wants that? But yeah, all that fun stuff. See you guys in a couple weeks, in a fortnight, for the year-end bash on the 30th, which is not New Year's Eve, but the day before New Year's Eve. So that is when we'll be recording the year-end bash. So see you guys then. All right, everyone in the chat, thank you guys for joining. Sorry, I just scrolled up to get that screen grab. You guys are awesome, though. Long days and pleasant nights. You guys, it's always fun to have you along with the conversation. Have a good holiday. Enjoy it all. Enjoy delicious food, presents. Enjoy, kids freaking out, having fun, gifts, all the fun stuff that goes along with Christmas. And of course, watch Jingle All the Way because it's the greatest Christmas movie of all time with Arnold Schwarzenegger. See you guys. See you in a couple weeks.